Morning, Joel. How's it going?
Very well. Nice to be back in action, Mel.
Yeah,
What a week last week, hey?
I know. I know. It's been like nonstop. But it feels like every January now in our lives is crazy. Like think of back to how crazy January 2025 was. It feels like 2026 is no different.
You know what? So as a Canadian, I actually think that Mark Carney speech was the first time that Canada has been in focus on the world stage in a very long time. And
Hmm.
that's unique to me being as an adult almost. And it was pretty exciting. And I think that caused a lot of of subsequent important outcomes afterwards. And I do believe that it really set the tone for the rest of the Davos meeting. And I know today that's kind of what we're going to want to talk about. But before we get there, I also think that Davos uniquely has this way of impacting the rest of the year. And as markets go, January tends to be the tone setter for the rest of the year. And for the first couple of weeks, we had our Santa Claus rally where the market did particularly well. And as I said earlier, as January goes, so does the rest of the year. If we have a good year or a good month of January, tends to forecast out and usually signal that we're going to have a good remainder of the year. But in healthy bull markets, you want to see certain sectors of the market do well. And right now, financials are starting to fall apart. You have not yet seen a reemergence of technology stocks, with the exception of AI infrastructure names, break out to higher highs since October. We have consumer staples, which drastically underperformed the market last year to the tune of roughly 16.5% lower than the S&P 500. They're leading in 2026. So the script is flipped in many ways. Consumer staples are up 6.5% this year, with the S&P up just 1.5%. That shift is a concerning item for me. When you combine that with financials and are starting to drastically underperform, the portions of this market that gave me confidence last year are starting to make me concerned this year. And if we don't see a change quickly, we likely need to be very defensive, and we have to start rethinking our portfolio strategy as wealth managers and as portfolio managers. I'm moderately concerned about where the United States economy, or their stock market more specifically, is currently sitting. And if we don't see a pivot quickly, follow along on my LinkedIn posts and newsletter, because I'm going to be talking about this and making sure that everybody understands. We need to see, if you want the broader averages, the S&P 500, the Dow, and the NASDAQ to continue to produce significant returns, you need to see participation from financials. You need to see consumer staples lag. And right now, that isn't happening. So if we're bullish, if we want to continue to see returns in our broader indexes, again, we need to see this shift really quickly. And it can't just be a subtle change. It needs to be fairly sharp. So right now, we have Canada that's holding up pretty well. Financials on that side are doing okay. Our mining industry, oil and gas, is really carrying the day. But for me, I'm going to be watching U.S. financials. I'm going to be watching consumer staples, and I'm going to be watching the U.S. dollar. If the U.S. dollar continues to deteriorate, if the yen continues to deteriorate, you can likely assume that international stocks are going to do really well. That includes Canada, Japan, broader Europe, but you'll also likely see a lagging U.S. So that's where we're currently sitting. I also believe that when they have this regular meeting in January in Davos, it tends to shift. As much as people aren't going to like this, these folks are thought leaders. They run the biggest countries, the most important countries, and the most important companies on the planet. When they speak, people should listen, whether or not we agree that they have any sort of semblance of understanding of what the world is actually going through. The fact of the matter is they control the strings, or pull the strings that tend to make and shake the world. So with that in mind, I want you to sort of go through the Mark Carney speech, perhaps, and what went on there, and how you think it's impacting Canada and its impact on and our changing approach to the new world order, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. The speech got so much attention, and I'm always so cautious whenever something political or related to politics happens and so many people are talking about it. It always makes me want to wait before commenting a little bit more and actually do a little bit more unpacking and thinking about things, because sometimes speeches like this, which Carney gave at Davos, which was, let's just lay it out. It was a rhetorically very good speech. It was a speech that no doubt a lot of people really liked. It was a speech that gave a little bit more Canada trying to assert its middle power status and actually caring about asserting that middle power status in a way that I don't think that we've seen before. There is no doubt that Carney appears as a grown-up. He is polished. He is smart. I don't think that any of the visuals or what we heard in the speech in terms of the way it sounded lyrically, anybody could argue that it sounded really good. But I think what comes to be even more complicated when looking at this speech is looking at the broader context. A lot of times when we hear speeches and we hear certain literary or philosophical tropes, I guess, raised in them, sometimes we don't always know the deeper meaning behind these things or what they're alluding to. And so we may be hearing one thing, even though Carney is saying another thing. Carney's speech represented, I think, broadly his desire to both recognize that there is a changing world order, which everybody is talking about. That's not a novel thought. But I think that the underlying tone that I'm still trying to work through is whether or not Carney believes that the world order is going to change in the direction away from U.S. hegemony. It kind of seems like that's where he's coming from. But the question I have is, in favor of what else? It's not realistic that Canada is going to, even if it wanted to, it doesn't have the capacity to fill the space that the United States is filling. And so what concerns me about some of what I heard in Carney's speech, particularly off the heels of him coming from China and Qatar, striking some deals with China when it comes to canola and EV products. And, we can get into some of the complexities, let's say, around Qatar. What I think I take away from this speech is that I really commend the fact that Carney is recognizing that the world is changing. I am still trying to understand whether or not he is convinced, he and his government are convinced that the world is changing in the direction that's going to be ultimately beneficial for Canadians, and whether or not he is on the right side of history when it comes to some of these changes. I'll say a couple more things before we kind of get into chatting about it. Carney evoked a historical thinker and former Czechoslovak president, President Havel, in his speech, talking about this idea of there being a sign in the window, that people just go along with things sometimes that they don't actually agree with because it's what's expected of them. And, in reading the speech and listening to it a few times, it seems like he thinks and is sort of alluding to the fact that that's what people think about U.S. hegemony. And when I read into that a little more, I wonder if what he's talking about when it comes to U.S. hegemony is a lot of the idealistic things that we think of when we think of the United States: free markets, innovation, a free society, defense of Western values, leadership on the world stage. Now, I'm not saying that in the current context, all of those things are happening in the best way. In fact, you could probably argue that the U.S. itself is obviously in a little bit of a strange place right now domestically, as much as it is from a foreign policy perspective as well. But I think I just wonder what Carney's vision is. He seems to want to align more to Europe, and he seems to think that we can have this like coalition of the willing with Europe from an economic perspective, from a defense perspective. I don't know if that's entirely possible. Again, we're in a stage where nothing up is down and down is up, and none of the patterns that we typically rely on in analyzing these foreign policy issues should be applied without deeper thought. I think I am personally optimistic that Carney seems to want to do something. I think where I am cautious and wanting to know more is whether or not that's something that he wants to do is going to put Canada on the right or wrong side of history. And the unfortunate part about that is that there's actually no way to understand what the consequences of those decisions are. And we could, if we're still doing this podcast in 20 or 30 years, perhaps we can harken back to this and think of whether or not the direction that Carney put Canada on was the right one or otherwise. But that's sort of my high level thoughts about this speech. It was very well liked by people, but I think the world is so complicated right now and there are so many layers and nuances. We should not expect people to have to be foreign policy and geopolitical experts to understand whether or not Canada's on the right or wrong path when it comes to that. But I can't help but think of all of the stuff that I have in my brain and that I know about the world and history, and just be nervous when it comes to this new direction and if it's actually going to be the right one.
Yeah, I think that that it doesn't need to be all one or the other, where you make, I think, really great points with regards to how he is kind of shifting towards Europe or a web-based alliance of partners away from this Canada-US relationship that has dominated our economic situation for the last little bit. I think that this idea of decoupling, I mean, something to the tune of 2/3 of our economy is based in our trade with the United States. To think that we could then shift that to Europe would be silly and also impossible. And I don't think that this speech where he shifts towards this, I don't know, value-based realism and this new Canadian strategy where we're going to have new economic nationalism means we just completely sever ties with the US. I actually believe that this is much more in a play towards refilling the Canadian trade negotiation gun. And when we were defending our position at the beginning of the Trump term in 2025, we had a very weak Justin Trudeau who had little support anywhere. He garnered zero respect from the sitting president in the United States and was often referred to as governor, et cetera. Just nothing was going right. And as a result, Donald Trump puts an enormous amount of pressure and shifts the landscape of our election, and Mark Carney comes in. Right now, we have a reality where the USMCA is up for review come July 1st. You have a sunset clause, which marks, I don't know, the 6th year of the agreement or something like that, where all three nations have to confirm in writing that they wish to extend the deal for another 16 years or something like that. And it's not as though the USMCA rolls over and it no longer exists. It just continues until perhaps something new occurs. And it's obviously in the best interest of ours probably to continue. However, it's been pretty clear that the US has new priorities. And they've been in agreement with Mexico for the last year and a half. There hasn't been a lot of chatter there. However, we've been and have treated the shots over the border from the Trump administration and retaliated, whereas the Mexicans have been significantly more agreeable. And obviously, this is as a result of us wanting to protect our autos and EVs and dairy access and all these sorts of things. And we have our own priorities as well. But going into the negotiation a year ago, it felt as though we didn't really have a leg to stand on. And it is the job of our prime minister to enact foreign policy and to build on our relationships with other countries so as to keep us from being so dependent on a country that has been hostile verbally for the last year and a half. So when Mark Carney has a strategic meeting with the Chinese government to consider a new trade deal, not a free trade deal, but a trade deal, I think what that is signaling to the market is that we are willing and or building up our inventory of bullets when we go to the table with the United States, who is going to be a challenging negotiating adversary. One where for the last year, they've been strategically trying to secure their borders and build upon the platform that Donald Trump ran on, and have continued to flex in different areas. I think that it's no surprise that they made a move on Maduro in Colombia. I think that it's no surprise Venezuela, sorry, and has made, we'll call it, sweeping statements about Greenland. All of that is to secure the United States. He's made that quite clear. I do believe that most of these moves are not based on commodity needs. It has much more to do with the golden dome, so to speak. And if we remember our history and we refer to why and how we negotiated such a terrific NAFTA deal, that was because of the Cold War, if people remember correctly. And our positioning relative to Russia, and now in this case, our positioning relative to Russia and China. And in order for the United States to secure their sovereignty, their security, well, it's very, very, very important for them to have a great relationship with Canada. And with all of that being said, you consider the national security needs of the United States. You consider the fact that they are they've signaled quite clearly that they want Greenland. They've signaled that they viewed Venezuela as being a risk. And it would be silly for Mark Carney not to read that and be like, you know what, that is a negotiation leverage for us that we had back in the 80s. And I think that is signaled doubly when he made a agreement to bring Chinese EVs to Canada, which to me is a big portion of the Trump base, where he finds it to be incredibly important to satisfy automakers. He talks about it all the time. He has such an incredible relationship with the Ford family, with GM, with all of these manufacturers that produce so many great, big, beautiful jobs in the United States. The threat of Asian cars or Chinese cars is very, very real. And if you don't think that is leverage for our country, it is. As much as autos are incredibly important for our national economy, it's nowhere near as important as agriculture currently is, and our oil and gas economy currently is. That is much more important. Certainly, it gets a lot of attention. It's won and swings a lot of elections. However, I think Carney has done a great job of reloading his gun, and I believe that it had a lot to do, or his speech had a lot to do with that. Donald Trump, prior to his speech, said it's totally fine. It's okay that they're having conversations with China. Everybody trades with China. It's great. Then Mark Carney gets a lot of attention, and nothing bugs Donald Trump like attention not being on himself. And it causes this domino effect where he starts to get mad. He considers 100% tariffs, realizes he can't do it because that's silly. And also there's no free trade agreement. And now we are where we are today. So this is, I think, a long way of me saying that I think the impact on the returns of the stock market in the coming year, and more specifically targeted at Canada, our stock market, our economy, is going to be heavily dependent on, one, the direction of mining, so like copper, potash, gold, silver, etc. But secondly, the outcome of the USMCA, our relationship with the United States, And I do believe that the speech that Mark Carney gave had a lot more to do with refilling that gun than it was signaling that we were leaving the United States. It also built, to me, more support domestically for him so that he's able to make more significant moves economically and make, I think, nation building deals, whether that be pipelines being built, et cetera. Because truly, I think, and you would know more about this than I ever will, I think support within your own party and popularity as a politician enables you to make bigger, bolder moves.
So, okay, yeah. So I want to dive into a couple of things that you said. So I'll start by just the last thing that you've said. Carney has actually nothing to worry about politically in Canada right now. And now it may seem like it because he doesn't quite have a majority and all of these things, but the Conservative Party is definitely in a period of, I don't even know how I would characterize the period. I'll be at the convention in Calgary this weekend, and I'll let you know the next time we chat what the mood is. But it's not the greatest mood right now. Carney is not in trouble politically. So I actually don't think that a lot of what he's doing right now is about domestic approval ratings or because he feels like he has to solve that problem. I think that he feels like that is going to be a natural consequence of him solving some of these other problems that he is much more interested in solving when it comes to the global stage. Now, I hear what you're saying in terms of everything that Carney is doing, but this is what I mean when I say that this speech had a lot of layers and that it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people if you're not fully unpacking. But like, what is this idea of values-based realism? You know, he uses these terms and we just like move on from them and we don't really unpack them. Realism isn't a theory in international relations that primarily talks about the fact that states are the primary actors in international relations and negotiations. And values-based realism is largely understood to be an idea that, yeah, states should matter. It's realism, but we should also want those states to be, you know, aligned with our values, which I am understanding Canada's values to be, you know, rule of law, democracy, etc. I think what's confusing to me is that, okay, if you want to take the sign out of the window when it comes to dealing with the US, if you want to, you know, demonstrate strength by being able to label things and call things what they are, I think there's merit in that. And I don't actually on its own fault Carney for that. But you're going to name the fact that the US may be allegedly having issues with its democracy, its rule of law, et cetera, and then you're going to go make a deal with China. Like this is part of where I have a little bit of an issue with it. I actually don't have a problem with naming that there's problems with the US, et cetera, but like we're not actually doing something different. We're doing something with different people. And I think this is constantly the problem that Canada has when it comes to its foreign policy and the way it conducts itself in the world. It's like, you know, it's like you're the person who doesn't want to actually do the thing. They just want to attach themselves to the person who's doing the thing. And I think what's so frustrating to somebody like me, who is a little bit more right of center, is like he says in his speech, we are an energy superpower. We are all of these things. Yes, we are, but we have not capitalized on those things in the past 10 years. I hope we will moving forward. But I think part of my struggle is like, it's one thing to want to fundamentally change your policy. Like Canada is going to focus more inward and be more isolationist and grow our economy and not depend on others as much. I think it's a miscalculation to say, well, we're not going to not depend on other people. We're just going to, instead of depending on the United States, which we realistically cannot not depend on, as you've noted, we're going to strengthen relationships with China or Qatar. I don't have as much of an issue with Europe, but when we talk about values-based realism, and in the same sentence, our shift in values-based realism is towards China and Qatar, I find there to be some dissonance with that. And maybe I just think of these things too specifically, but that's part of where my question mark on this speech comes from. But yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but I suppose where I come from this from a different angle, because I always think that the signal that any politician is ever giving is all fake and not necessarily real. The aligning yourselves from what is it, value-based realism, to align yourself with China and Qatar obviously seems like what? They have little in terms of similar values as us, as the Western world, yet we're choosing to align ourselves with them. That seems silly. I think the reality here is like that is noise. And to me, the real signal here is the economic statements that he was making with regards to like feed, fuel, and defend itself. So like they're going to double defense spending, and we have like a mandate to fast track strategic assets with regards to mining and special minerals and energy. Obviously, like put up or shut up, because our country hasn't actually been able to do any of those things for the last 15 years. But I think his speech signals that that is the intent, and that if he's willing to make that speech while talking to the world leaders of Europe, to the broader world, it means that he's serious and he's willing to come back home and do that. Understanding that, I mean, he's made this bold statement that he's aligning himself with, he does these deals with Qatar and with China. I do think that to me is not actually reality, because as you very clearly and accurately pointed out, we do not have overlapping values. So I suppose where I completely agree that his speech kind of isn't being confirmed in terms of value, I do believe that the signal from it was that there is a rupturing or fracturing world order. The world order that existed post Bretton Woods and the Cold War is changing. The United States is largely pulling away from a trade situation, a globalization situation that they benefited from, but also had to pay the lion's share of for the better part of 80 years. And we're now moving on from that and into something new. And I have this trade belief that the United States has, for the last, we'll call it 9 years, talked about the making America great again, or bringing manufacturing and building again in the United States. And that has this nationalist belief or statement. And what I actually think is occurring right now is, and this is my own view, I don't necessarily take this from anybody, I really believe that there is a nearshoring happening with regards to the United States. That as much as they would love to manufacture in the center of America and bring back everything that they ended up exporting over the last 50 years, it's not possible. But they do have two incredible partners north and south of them. And it's very, very in their best interest to utilize the cheap labor south and the engineering and mineral talent of the north. And what the market is showing us is that the United States has been on this massive performance heater for the better part of 20 years, while the rest of the world has lagged. And last year, the United States underperformed international, it underperformed Canada, and underperformed Mexico from a stock market performance perspective. Mexico led. Why? Canada was up 26%. Why? The world was under this impression that the United States was going to decimate us and not not trade with us. Yet our trade is growing. Our travel and is not. We are not traveling to the United States because people are rejecting that relationship. But the reality is that we are going to continue to trade. And I actually believe that our relationship is going to strengthen, as much as it's going to be hard for us to digest that reality. The fact of the matter is, I believe that it's going to be a benefit to us that the United States is becoming more nationalistic, wanting to pull away from the rest of the world. And while our current messaging between our prime minister and the president of the United States might not have a lot of overlap, That's not, price tells the story. The market moves first. And that to me is much more important for people to pay attention to. And I think uniquely, this is beneficial to Canada more so than it ever has in the past. And I'm very optimistic. And maybe this is it's almost like I'm to a fault overly optimistic about things. But I think that from the perspective of the Canadian, we should be thankful for a lot of that's happened over the last 2, maybe 3 years. So
we should be. And I'll just say one last thing about this. All I think I'm asking listeners to consider is that if what you're saying is true and ends up happening, and there's a nearshoring and there's an incredible economic opportunity for Canada available, then we should think about the extent to which Carney and the Liberals are making foreign policy decisions on who we partner with based on domestic perceptions of President Trump and the current US government. And I think that we don't have to like everything that's going on with the US, and you don't have to be a fan with President Trump. But I do just think that we need to also take stock of whether or not we are allowing that dislike to push us to believe that a stronger alliance with China or Qatar is beneficial, because it's like anything but Trump. And again, you don't have to like Trump or like the current US administration to understand or, unpack the ways in which that can be long-term not a good move for Canada to make. And I think that part of what we need to hold Carney to account on, and again, I didn't hate the speech, but part of what we need to hold Carney to account on is like, it is probably actually a lot smarter for Carney to be closer to the US and developing a better relationship with the US than he is. And we have to ask why airtime for some of these other relationships appears to be, I don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but appears to be taking precedence. And I think that actually does have something to do with domestic approval and domestic attitudes when it comes to our relationship with the US. And I think the job of a leader is not to crowdsource foreign policy advice from boomers who are post-economic, that have the luxury of saying, well, I don't like that guy, so I don't want to deal with him, and actually do what's best for the country long term. So that's the only thing I'll leave.
I love that statement, by the way. The older generation, let's call it 60 plus generation, that despises the United States now because of their hyper attachment to news and CNN and their hatred for an individual, ignoring the importance. And when you say post-economic, for those that don't maybe understand this, my understanding of that is they don't need to worry about having a job because their house is worth $2 million, their portfolio is enormous, and they've got a great pension that will
the luxury belief holders of the world.
They don't have to worry about anything. So they now get to be disgusted with the world now that because they benefited from the global world order and the United States to a lesser extent. For the last 45 years. I completely agree with you. And to sever our most important economic relationship because of an individual that will no longer be around in 3 years is incredibly selfish, but kind of somewhat on brand for a generation that has always kind of treated situations. So I hope I'm not being too harsh, but I do get somewhat annoyed by that when we are in we'll call it the building of our careers. We are having children, and we need to build for the next 50, 100 years. And I think that we're going to get in our own way, shoot ourselves in the foot if we're going to focus on the individual while not taking care of our nation for the next 20, 50, 100 years. So yeah, I implore the older generation to vote with that in mind, to think economically with that in mind. Certainly don't travel there, send your message that way, but to tell our politicians that they cannot do business with them, holy, are you really making it hard for your children and your children's children?
And to think that positive alternative to doing business with Donald Trump as Xi Jinping is like, I don't understand it. Like, make it make sense. Again,
Yes.
like, I'm not saying we shouldn't be dealing with China, but it's like, if we are a values-based realism or values-based international order, I think we should take a look at those values before doubling down on them.
Completely agree. And, interestingly, after Mark Carney's speech, I think it changed the tune of Davos. The new incumbent, or the new leadership in Europe, I think there's been a very stark change in their attitude, the policy, the regulation that they're signaling. And I believe that it is all in the best interest of Europe, where I think that has not been the case for 15, 20 years. And I think that tells a really great story. And there's a ton of value internationally that hasn't been there for a very long time. And we're starting to see a shift. And again, back to the positive side of things, this is in response to hatred towards an individual to an extent. But I also believe, and this has been stated by a lot of the AI research lab, we'll call it founders, and they've said this very clearly: whatever AI wants or needs, it gets. And interestingly, the biggest bottleneck for AI build out for the last 3-4 years has been energy. And holy mackerel, have we seen energy policy shift in Europe and in Canada. It's now okay to drill. It's okay. Nuclear used to be in pot, like you were not allowed to consider that.
And to give Carney the credit,
150%.
To give Carney credit, maybe that is the sign we're taking out of the window that Havel was talking about, of like this like virtue signaling, luxury belief sign that like we all just had in the window. Maybe that is where he's coming from. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt of like, oh, we don't do this, we don't do that. And now maybe we're becoming a little bit more realistic on whether or not those are actually things that we believe and whether they're serving where we want to go long term. So I'll give him that benefit of the doubt. You could read the speech many different ways. You could take, and I think that's actually the mark of a good political speech, is when several different types of people can read it and feel like they got what they wanted from it. So
yeah, I mean, I do think that there is a economic partner in China that we are going to find and use. I mean, our exports to China surged 21% last year. I don't think that that's unimportant to view. I do believe that if we are going to want to expand our exports and the GDP of our country, we need to have more customers.
I'm not anti-China. I agree.
So again, I'm of the opinion that the speech meant a lot to, and you are very accurately say this, and this is where I love having this conversation with you, because it reframes my mind. The reality is I digest that in because of my own biases and what I want to see happen. And to me, I guess we'll wait and see how this plays out. And because it's very difficult, and you warned me prior to this podcast, like, don't make predictions on Trump. That's a bad idea, because he changes his mind so violently and so quickly. But I also believe that there is a method to the madness. And at the end of the day, in 5 years, we're going to have seen a closer knit North America than we have in the last 15. So that's where I stand today. I am paying very close attention to the market right now. It's in limbo at the moment. There's been a lot of economic news to digest. 2026 is going to be more volatile than 2025. Funny enough, we have an election, or elections in the United States. We have an outgoing Fed chairman. We have what I think to be a political situation down south that is a little bit testy at the moment, and also a massive technological innovation that is growing at a pace in which I don't think people are fully understanding. So there's a lot of positive and there's a lot of headwinds, and it's going to cause for volatile markets. And I'm excited to talk about it with you for the rest of the year. And our listeners should expect that we're going to be a little bit more organized, and I hope to be a little bit more concrete in our topic arcs moving forward, and build upon that. So,
well, we should say to people, if you have, Joel and I are going to get together in the next few days and talk about some of the big themes that we want to talk about this quarter. So if you have things that you want us to cover in the podcast, feel free to comment or send us a note, and we'll make sure that we incorporate things. The more niche, the better, honestly. Like, I feel like the more we can like zero in on these niche things, it always creates a really good discussion and an interesting one that maybe others aren't having.
Completely agree, Mel. I know you got to get rolling, and I appreciate your time.
Awesome. Okay, see you, Joel.